When you think of famous missing people, your mind might go to those who've been missing for years or decades. Some examples include Jimmy Hoffa, the leader of the American Labor Union. His disappearance in 1975 is one of the most mysterious cases in U.S. history. Despite many theories and alleged confessions, no trace of his remains have ever been found. Or maybe you're thinking of Madeleine McCann, the British toddler who went missing from her family's holiday home in Portugal in 2007. These are just two of many people who have vanished without a trace. But sometimes entire towns can vanish too. Take Alaska, for example. Alaska has a number of small towns scattered throughout its vast landscape, many of which were once bustling communities of gold miners or whalers. But as the resources they depended on dwindled, many of these towns were abandoned, and their residents moved away, leaving the settlements deserted. This is why there are now ghost towns all over the state. In fact, it is estimated that around 40% of Alaska, 1,700 or so communities, are considered to be either abandoned or have very few people living in them. One of the most well-known of these ghost towns is Teller, located on the Seward Peninsula about 800 miles from Anchorage. While it was never really a large settlement, reaching only a population of around 160 by the 1930s, it had all the usual trappings of a typical frontier town. There was a jail, schoolhouse, post office, trading store, and even a newspaper. For a while, though, life was good in Teller. Gold had been discovered in the area back in 1898 and brought thousands of prospectors rushing to the area. They built tents and cabins, and eventually shacks and houses, and Teller became a hub of commerce for the surrounding mining camps. But as with many of the world's gold rushes, the gold soon ran out, and the rush began to wane. By the early 20th century, there were fewer than 100 people left living in Teller. But unlike other settlements, Teller didn't fade away into obscurity. It actually had another boom, this time thanks to World War II. When the Japanese began advancing across the Pacific and moving closer to the United States, military leaders realized how vulnerable the country's west coast was. They decided to build a radar base near Teller to warn them of incoming attacks. Suddenly, Teller's population boomed, back up to 160. A mess hall was constructed, and barracks housed the influx of new military personnel. But this second boom didn't last long either. By 1958, the threat posed by Japan had subsided. And 2 years later, the government sold the land to private owners and shut down the base. With its economy once again in shambles, the remaining residents packed up and left, leaving the buildings behind. Today, all that remains of Teller's wartime boom is a rusted metal skeleton of the mess hall and a few concrete foundations where the barracks once stood. In recent years, some brave tourists and adventurers have made their way to Teller to explore what little remains. While some of the buildings have completely fallen apart, others, like the jail and schoolhouse, still stand somewhat intact. However, the journey to Teller isn't easy. It's only accessible by a bush plane or a 6-day hike through the Alaskan wilderness. So if you plan on visiting, make sure you're prepared. Another Alaskan ghost town that saw multiple waves of settlement is the town of St. Mary's. Unlike Teller, though St. Mary's was originally founded not for the promise of gold, but for the church, a Russian Orthodox mission was established in the early 1800s, followed soon by a small settlement of Aleut people, the native Alaskans. Over the next several decades, the settlement grew, shrinking again after the Russian-American Company, which had been operating Alaska as a colony under a charter granted by the Russian government, sold Alaska to the U.S. in 1867. The town had a second boom during the gold rush when prospectors would pass through on their way to the Nome gold fields. It was around this time that the settlement was renamed St. Mary's, but the third and final wave of settlers were reindeer herders, who were brought to Alaska by the U.S. government in an effort to create a source of food for the native population. The government believed that reindeer were ideally suited to Alaska, its harsh climate and plentiful forage, and that raising reindeer could become a lucrative industry. Unfortunately, they had undone their homework and didn't realize that the animals could easily escape and roam wild. Within a few years, there were thousands of reindeer in Alaska, more than the native population could eat, and the reindeer industry collapsed. With its purpose gone, the town of St. Mary's was quickly abandoned, leaving behind only crumbling log cabins and the weathered walls of the old St. Mary's Church. Today, The town is a popular destination for adventurers and archaeologists looking to uncover relics of the past. And the town's cemetery is still filled with well-preserved graves from the late 1800s. But perhaps one of the most haunting Alaskan ghost towns is the island of Shishmaref. Shishmaref is a small Arctic island about 200 miles north of Teller. It was first settled by Inuit people and then became home to a large whaling station in the early 1900s. But it was during World War II that Shishmaref really grew. The U.S. military built an airbase on the island and brought in soldiers and their families, causing the population to skyrocket to 550 people. But after the war, the military base was abandoned, and with it, most of the residents. Those who stayed behind struggled to sustain themselves, hunting whatever seals they could find and relying on fish for most of their nutrition. By the 1980s, there were only 12 people left living on Shishmaref. But even they were forced to leave in 2003 when the island began to fall apart. Rising sea levels and thawing permafrost caused the ground beneath Shishmaref to collapse. Buildings crumbled into the sea, and residents were forced to abandon their homes. Today, nothing remains of Shishmaref, except a few concrete pilings where the airstrip once stood, and the rotting hulk of the island's last schoolhouse, which still stands precariously on the edge of the collapsing island. While these ghost towns are fascinating to explore, they also serve as a reminder of the harsh realities of life in Alaska. Even today, many of Alaska's remaining towns struggle to stay afloat, both literally and figuratively. The state is one of the most expensive places to live in the United States, with high costs for everything from groceries to utilities. And many towns are struggling to maintain their infrastructure. But despite these challenges, many Alaskans wouldn't trade their way of life for anything. The state is known for its breathtaking natural beauty, from its snow-capped mountains to its vast wilderness areas. There's nowhere else quite like it. And while life in Alaska may be tough, it's also filled with a sense of adventure and independence that's hard to find anywhere else. For Alaskans, home isn't just a place, it's a way of life. And no matter how hard things get, they know they'll always have each other and the great outdoors to rely on. So do you know of any other spooky abandoned places in Alaska or elsewhere that we should explore? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more updates. Thanks for watching.